Hey guys, Percolator. This is going to be my last video for now in the Getting Started with Home Lab series. I feel like after this video, the Home Lab we've created is a great starting point for anyone getting into Home Lab. It may not match your personal preferences, but it should be a great base to get you started. This does not mean I won't revisit this topic in the future. In this video, we're going to set up what I feel like is the most critical part of a good Home Lab, that being where you document your learnings. For this, we'll be using Wikijs as it's my preferred wiki and documentation solution, as it is easy to set up and works great with other local note-taking applications that use Markdown since it's just standard Markdown. I'm also going to show how to save Docker data to an NFS share. This means that all of our wiki data is saved to our NAS instead of our VM. This should mean that in the event that something happens to our wiki, our data should still be available on our NAS. All we will have to do is recreate the Wikijs Docker instance and point it at our data. This type of setup should work for all kinds of Docker containers. So the first thing that we need to do is set up our NFS share. That way we have our permissions out of the way before we go ahead and move on to setting up Docker. In order to do this, I'm going to head over to TrueNAS Scale since that's what I'm using for my NFS share. So I'm going to head over to datasets, and I would recommend making a dataset for each Docker container that you would like to have an NFS share for. That way, it's separated out as different data sets, not separated out as different folders inside of an NFS share. It just makes things a little bit more cleaner in my experience. So here, we're gonna go ahead and go to add data set, and we're gonna name this one Wikijs. Let's go ahead and name it Wikijs-db. That way we know it's the database. From here, we can go ahead and down, and we don't need to play with any of the defaults. We can just go ahead and press save. Now that we have that saved, all we need to do is head over to our shares. And inside of shares, we need to go ahead and click these three little dots and go to configure service. Once here, we need to go down to where it says NFS version 4 and make sure it says enable NFS version 4. This just makes things a little bit easier to work with in my experience. Once we've done that, we can go ahead and press save. After that, we can head back to shares and we can go ahead and press add shares. From here, we need to go ahead and select the path that we created. So in my case, it will be -mmt-tank0/wikijs.db. And then we need to go ahead and add our host. In my case, I'm going to head over to the SSH connection I already have set up, and I already have it highlighted, but this is the IP address of the machine that will be accessing it. This is the host that I'm running Docker on. So in my case, it's 192.168.0.30. And we'll just press add and enter that number here. Once we've added that number there, we can go down to advanced options, and we're going to need to set map root user and map root group. The map root user, in our case, we'll set it to root, and that seems to be fine on most Linux distributions that you're using Docker on. However, map root group, you may need to change between two different ones, depending on if the sudo group is will or if the sudo group is sudo. In order to find this out, you can head over to whatever machine you're planning on setting Docker up on, and you can go ahead and type in the ID command. From here, you can see if this user is part of sudo. In my case, it's part of sudo. Or if, say, you're on a Fedora or an Arch Linux, it will say it's part of will. If it's part of will, you'll set the map root group to will. If it's sudo, you'll set it to sudo. In my case, we're going to set it to sudo since I'm on Ubuntu. And we're going to go ahead and press save. Now that we've set that up, and that should be everything that we need to do as far as permissions when it comes to our NFS share. Now I'm going to show you how I went about creating our Docker Compose file. I'm doing this because in a lot of tutorials that I've seen in the past, you just have a magic file, and I don't like magic files. Magic files are files that you don't really know how they work. You were just given by somebody that knows how they work and told to run it. I don't like those. So I'm going to show you where I got my documentation and where I got my information from. That way you can troubleshoot it on your own if you need to. In order to get started with this Docker Compose file, first I headed over to js.wiki. This is the official documentation for Wikijs. From here, I go over to documentation and I go to 2.0 docs because I want the latest version of Wikijs. From here, I went, well, what do I need to do? I need to install Wikijs. So let's go to the installation guide, and I'm going to be using Docker. So let's go ahead and go to Docker. From here, I looked at this page and I went, I'm going to use Docker Compose since that's my preferred way of deploying Docker images. So I seen, oh, look, they have a Docker Compose file. Let me just go ahead and copy that and move over to a text editor and paste that in. From here, I went ahead and looked at it, and I see if there's anything glaring that I need to change. In my case, the first thing I've seen is a password. Anytime you see a password, you want to go ahead and write out a reminder to go ahead and change it. Whenever you see a password, you want to go ahead and be able to change this, because these passwords are known to everybody, and if everybody knows the password, it's not very secure. You also want to go ahead and see if there's any other passwords that match this. So I'm looking for anything that says Wikijs rocks. As I can see down here under database, it says Wikijs rocks, and I'm gonna go ahead and press the space and go ahead and put me too. That way I know that both of these need to be changed and that these will match. You can do this however you would like. In my case, I'm just doing comments. In yours, you may want to go ahead and change the password and go ahead and save this a file. However, if you do have your actual password in here, make sure you do not push it to Git or any other Git service or online service or whatever, because if you push this up to somewhere, everyone now has your database password. That's not very secure, so make sure you don't do that. In my case, since we're going to be deploying this for a YouTube video, I'm going to leave these as a default password, since it doesn't really matter if everybody knows my password. In your case, you would like to go ahead and change this before you deploy it. The next issue that I see with this is I would like to go ahead and change this port. I don't like things on my home lab to run on port 80. I like things to run on different random ports. So in my case, I'm going to change this to port 8088. And that way, whenever I have to go to access this, I'll access this via port 8088. From here, now that you've changed your password and you've changed your port, if you needed to, you can go ahead and deploy this if you wanted all your data to be stored locally under the volume DB data. And that would work completely fine. But since we want to use NFS in order to save our database to, we need to go ahead and change a few more things. And I'm going to go ahead and show you where I got the information to set up the volume as a NFS share. So the first thing I did is I headed over to DuckDuckGo and I looked up how to set up NFS Docker. And I read a couple of articles. The ones I would highly recommend reading first is the volumes documents over on the Docker page. This I would highly recommend reading all the way over just to get a good understanding of how volumes work inside of Docker. This is a good place to start and to learn how volumes work. It should teach you everything you need to know about volumes since it's the official documentation. In here, it also goes through a few things about NFS volumes and creating service. And there's some commands. For instance, I stole the NFS version 4 from here. That's just setting the NFS version to make sure it is NFS version 4 instead of NFS version 3. That's something that I did steal from there, as you can see it down here. But yeah, the Docker docs is something that I would highly recommend reading over. But where I actually found my answer was up here at thephoenixnap.com. And under here, they had a good article, and I went ahead and read through this. But down here at the end, it had a version that said mounting NFS volumes with Docker Compose. And what I did is, knowing a little bit about Docker volumes, I just went ahead and copied this bottom part, headed over to my thing, my Docker Compose file, pasted it over volumes, and I went ahead and edited this to match what I needed it to match. So in my case, I went ahead and renamed this to Wikijs database, but over here on this file, it's already called db-data, and that's completely fine. It's kind of up to you, whatever you would like to name this. It really doesn't matter. In this file, the one we're going to actually be using, I renamed it to wikijs-db just to make things a little bit more make sense to me instead of it just being general database data. But database data works perfectly fine. It's just a name. And then I went ahead and added driver local. This did not seem to have any kind of impact. However, I have always been told whenever you've do volumes to go ahead and set the driver version and then to go ahead and set the driver ops and have those set differently. I don't know if this exactly why. I was just told this a while back, so I still do this. It may not be needed. And then down here in address, I went ahead and set the address to the IP address that I need, which in my case, it is 192.168.0.11. And I went ahead and added to go ahead and set it to what version of NFS. So NFS version VRS equals 4. That go ahead and make sure that it knows that it's looking for NFS version 4 for permissions and everything else. And then the path, we got this path from our TrueNAS, and inside of TrueNAS, all you need to do is go over to your NFS shares and you can copy the path here. This path is the path that you need in order to store things there. Also, make sure you're getting rid of any trailing white space, as I have noticed that does sometimes cause an issue. Now, everything between these two files should be matching almost 100%. The names of the databases in both are different, but for the most part, these should be exactly the same, and we should be ready to go ahead and deploy this. Now, I'm going to be using the pre-made file that I already have, and this should be listed, and the only reason I'm using this one is because it has the correct names for the volumes that I would like them to be named, but it should be identical as explained before. From here, there's two different ways we can go ahead and deploy this based off of what we already have set up. We can go ahead and use Portainer, or we can go ahead and use Docker Compose. Now, as you can see in here, this says this block will be used Docker Compose, so they're pretty much identical. And it's kind of up to you, personal preference. I've already went over how to deploy something in Docker Compose and how to go over and do things in Portainer. All you would do is go ahead and paste that file in here, give it a name, and press deploy, and you should be mostly good. But in this video, we're gonna go ahead and be using Docker Compose because I feel like that is a more universal way to install things, and it's my preferred way to do Docker. So what we're gonna go ahead and do is we're gonna go ahead and SSH into the machine that we want to install this on. In my case, this is going to be SSH, and we're gonna go percolator at 192.168.0.30. And this is the machine that we had set up in the past tutorials, and the one that we currently have a few Docker containers running on. And as you can see, we have a few updates, so I'm going to go ahead and run those. In my case, during this update, I had a kernel update that seems to require a reboot, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. Now, that step of updating is completely optional, but in my case, I went ahead and ran them because I felt like it was appropriate to do so. From here, we're going to go ahead and run an ls command just to see what's in here. And we have that test file that we made in an earlier tutorial. I'm going to go ahead and clear the screen. And I'm going to go ahead and make a directory called Wikijs. We're going to cd into Wikijs. And inside of here, this is where our Docker Compose file is going to live. So I'm going to go ahead and do nvim docker-compose.yml. In this case, I don't have NeoVim installed, and you could use another editor, but I'm going to go ahead and install NeoVim. So to do that, I'm going to do sudo apt install NeoVim. Enter in my sudo password or my user's password, and it should go ahead and install NeoVim. Now that I have my preferred text editor installed, I can go ahead and use it. So I'm going to clear the screen again by pressing Ctrl L, and I'm going to go ahead and do nvim dash, and then we're going to go ahead and give it a name of docker-compose.yml. And that will be our Docker Compose file. From here, I'm going to just go ahead and copy all of this file by highlighting all of it. And we're going to press Control Shift and C inside of NeoVim. This may not work. It kind of depends on your distribution. If you're using NeoVim or something else. If you're new to NeoVim, I'd recommend using something like VS Codium. But in my case, I already have everything set up. So NeoVim works fine. And over here, I'm going to go ahead and press Control Shift V to paste it into our remote terminal or our other machine. From here, we can go ahead and do our save, which is :wq. And now it has been saved. Now that we have our Docker Compose file set up, all we need to do is run Docker Compose up. In order to do this, all we do is type Docker Compose up. And if you like to run this as a daemon, you would do -d, but for our first run, we're going to go ahead and leave it as not a daemon so we can see everything start up, because this doesn't start up extremely cleanly, and sometimes it does take a few minutes, and I'm going to walk you through a couple of things that happens during this install and what you should be looking out for. So what it goes ahead and pulls the container, and it goes and pulls everything it needs to know about the container and pulls all the changes that have been made for this image. Now that it's done that, it goes ahead and starts up our containers. And in our case, it creates a DB and a wiki. And as you can see, this is the output from each one of those. Now, as you can see here, our Wikijs-1, which is our wiki, and our database. Our database is still starting. However, our Wikijs instance is already trying to connect. This is going to fail for sometimes 2 or 3 minutes, depending on the speed of the machine. And you may get some random errors, like for instance this one, but in my experience so far, these have not caused an issue. It does take a few minutes for this to start up the first time because the wiki database is creating a lot of new files, and that seems to take 2 to 3 minutes depending on your machine. If you have a much slower machine than mine, then it could take 5-10 minutes. If you have a much faster one, it could be done in a few seconds. But I'm going to let this load, and whenever it gets done, I'll show you the next few steps. As you can see here, it's a success from the database, which means that the database has successfully started up. Now from here, it still can take a minute or two, but it is worth noting that from here, you know you've got a successful connection, and it says it is ready to accept connections here. Now from here, you'll get some messages, and these will mostly end up being fine. You can read through these if you would like, and as you can see, you get one more failed message, and then you'll get one that says it finally connects. From here, it'll say what port and all of that stuff. It'll give you a bunch of information, and then it'll tell you browse to your IP address 3000. This is not correct. You will not be going to port 3000. You'll be going to the port that we mapped this to. Now from here, we can go ahead and access our wiki. In order to do this, we just head over to our browser, and we want to navigate to the IP address of the server. In my case, that would be 192.168.0.30. And we want to go ahead and add the port, which is port 8088 in our case, because that's what we set. From here, we can press enter, and we'll be greeted with our Wikijs container, and we can see that we have everything set up here. From here, you can go ahead and enter your email address and your password, as well as your site URL. And you can read about a few things in here. Say for instance, if you're using a internal one, you don't really care about what this is, and we can fix this later, as well as telemetry. And you can go ahead and press install. But before we do this, I want to go ahead and make sure that this container is running as a daemon. So we're going to head back over to our terminal, and we're going to go ahead and press Control-C to go ahead and cancel and shut down this container. And then from here, we're going to go ahead and run docker ps and see if it is running. In our case, yes, it is running. So we want to go ahead and do docker stop, and we want to go ahead and say wiki db and wiki-1. After that, it should stop after a few seconds. Now, as you can see in that last clip, at the very end, it gave me a bit of an error. However, it just took a few more seconds for the Docker container to shut down, from what I understood. I did try to run the Docker kill, but as you can see, it did not show up. And when you run docker ps, the container is no longer there. So I believe it just took a little bit longer to shut down than what Docker was waiting on it for. So from here, we're going to go ahead and restart that container. All we're going to do is go to docker compose up, since we're still in this file, and we're going to go with -d. From here, it should go ahead and start it as a daemon so that we don't have all that stuff running on our screen. And if we were to leave this SSH, it won't just magically shut down the container. Now that we've reset it as a daemon, we can go ahead and reload the page, and eventually, after a few seconds, it may take just as long as it did the first time in order for it to start, but eventually you will end up with a page here just like you did before. Now, if you become concerned because the site has not started up in in a small amount of time, you can go ahead and run a watch docker ps, and every 2 seconds it'll update. If you see this Postgres database is still up and this about a minute keeps going up, you should be fine. This wiki database, the one that says wiki 2, this entry point may keep going from 30 seconds down to 0, and that's it just restarting as we've seen earlier. This can take 2 to 3 to 4 minutes depending on the speed of your machine. Once again, this does tend to take a bit. Once your wiki is loaded, you can now go ahead and fill out all this information. In my case, we went ahead and put the Percolator YouTube email address, and we went ahead and set a password. And for this, we're going to go ahead and set this to our URL. And in my case, I'm going to be using a reverse proxy. And down here, it gives you some information. And I'm not actually using a public URL. And in my experience, this doesn't really matter what you set it to. So in my case, I'm just going to set it to js.percolator.duckdns.org. I'm going to go ahead and leave telemetry on, and we're going to go ahead and press install. From here, it should take a few minutes, and you'll be presented with your Wikijs. Now that you've been redirected to your Wikijs, you can go ahead and log in. And in my case, I'm going to go ahead and use my auto login, which will be this one. Now that we've logged in, we can go ahead and create our homepage. There are many tutorials on how to set up Wikijs, and they probably do a little bit better than mine. But in my case, I'm going to go ahead and hit create a homepage. And in here, I'm going to go ahead and select Markdown because that's my preferred way of editing. And I'm going to go ahead and give it a name of Home Lab. Now, how you set up this wiki is completely up to you. This is docs for my home lab. Cool. And you can give it tags. You can do a bunch of stuff that you would like to do with a wiki. Up here, we're going to go ahead and name it Percolator Home Lab. And then we're going to go ahead and put our content down here. And our content is going to be YouTube videos once a week. Cool. Then here we can go ahead and press create. And you have your very first homepage set up. And you can go ahead and start editing stuff inside of your Wikijs. that's most of what you need to know about Wikijs. You can create pages. It works just like most other wikis. I don't have a ton of experience with other wikis, but I do have some experience with other wikis, and yeah, it's pretty good. There's tons of tutorials on how to set up things. Personally, I don't have the best setup or the best look, feel, themes, all of that set up with Wikijs. I'm still learning most of Wikijs. I'm just using it as a place to put all of my long-term notes. You may do a better job with this than I do. I'm not particularly good at organizing notes. However, I do believe that having a good wiki and good documentation software is very important for a home lab. There's one last thing I would like to go ahead and do, and I'd like to make sure that all of our data is actually being stored on our NAS. In order to do that, I'm going to head over to our NAS, and I'm going to go ahead and log back into mine since I have been logged out due to timeout. And I'm going to go over here to system settings. I'm going to go to our shell, and I'm going to go ahead, since I am admin, I'm not the sudo, I'm going to go ahead and become sudo user so I can look at some files that only the root user has access to. So in order to do that, I'm going to do sudo su / tac, press enter, and enter the password for admin. From here, we are now root. And I'm going to go ahead and do cd-mmt. So we're going to go to the mount directory. And then we're going to go to tank 0. And then we're going to go to Wikijs backup, or Wikijs DB. In here, we can go ahead and press ls. And as you can see, all of our Wikijs information is being stored in here. And that's great. So we can go ahead and exit. And we know that we are actually storing our data on our NAS. From here, we can go over to our Wikijs, and well, let's go ahead and do a docker stop. And we're going to go ahead and do docker stop wikijs db and wikijs wiki -1. And we're going to go ahead and stop both of those. Once again, you may get a timeout error on the wikidb. Sometimes it just takes a little bit longer for it to shut down, then Docker will wait on it. In the case in which it is going to give you this command, you can go ahead and do a watch docker ps, and this will let you know whenever it has shut down. So this will update every 2 seconds. And as soon as you see Postgres go away, you know that it has shut down. And as you can see there, it went ahead and shut down. It just took a little while. Now that we have both of them shut down, I want to go ahead and show that if we were to start up a new version of that container, that, well, all of our data will still be there. So how I'm going to demonstrate that is we're going to go ahead and do Docker. We're going to go ahead and do Docker remove, and we're going to go ahead and remove Wikijs DB, and we're going to go ahead and remove Wikijs wiki -1. Now that we have our Docker container stopped and we have the Docker container removed, we're going to go ahead and remove the Docker volume. I've already done that because of the little bit of an error that I made by sneezing. But now that it's all gone, we can go ahead and recreate our Docker container, and we should still have all of our database information set up so that one page that we made should still be there. So in order to do this, we're going to go ahead and do Docker compose up -d. Now it'll go ahead and create the database, and it'll go ahead and create the container, and it'll go ahead and create the wiki as well. From here, we can go ahead and once again do a watch docker yes, and we can just wait for those to go ahead and get started up. Once again, the Postgres, you will see it keep going up, and the wiki, you'll see it shut down a few times as it keeps trying to connect and can't until the database is already set up and working. This tends to take anywhere from a minute to 3 minutes ago. See, there it went. It went ahead and reset. Now that on our watch, we see that this top one, in our case, the one that says wiki, has been up for about a minute, and it's been a couple of cycles since it has refreshed, and now it says up for about a minute. We can pretty safely assume that the wiki is now up and the database is now connected. So all we need to do is head back over to the website and hit refresh. And as you can see, it reloaded our information. And that is from essentially starting with a fresh container and then just pointing it towards our data. So if we were to blow away the VM, theoretically, we would be able to come back and create our setup and just point it to the same data set, and it should still all be here. Now that I've shown we can blow away the container as well as the container's volume, and we'll still have our data, we're going to go ahead and move on to our last step, which is adding it to our Nginx proxy manager. In order to do this, it's much like we've done in the past. We just head over to our Nginx proxy manager, hit add proxy host, type in a domain, which in our case would be js.percolator.nginx. duckdns.org. Press enter, and we're gonna go ahead and give it the IP address 192.168.0.30, and give it an IP address or a port, which is 8088. And in my case, I'm gonna go ahead and add a second one. We're gonna do the second one just because I would like to be able to access it by just going to Wiki. Then we're gonna go ahead and go over to our SSL, and we're just going to go ahead and select the SSL cert. From here, we can go ahead and press save, and we can click either one of these links, and it should take us to our Wiki, as well as give us our SSL cert. That'll be all for this tutorial. Using the NFS shares in the way that we did today can be used for other containers, not just Wikijs, and it's a pretty good way of storing your data somewhere else. I don't recommend doing this with huge databases as they can get a bit slow over NFS. However, if you have raw data such as torrents or things like that, it's a pretty good way of storing them. If you enjoyed the video, please remember to like, comment, and subscribe, as it helps me grow as a channel and it helps motivate me to make content in the future. Please leave feedback in the comments below of anything that you would like to see in the future, as well as things that I can do to improve. Thank you very much for watching. This is Percolator signing out.